Hey guys, so for our homework tonight, we are going to discuss different transportation resources in manufacturing areas. I know those are big words, but we're going to go through it bit by bit. As we go through them, your job is to annotate your map. You should have a map, blank map of the US already in your notebook. When we go through each industry, make sure you label where the industry is and what is being produced. And it's going to be just in front of you on the picture, so all you're going to have to do is copy down. Just make sure you're doing everything correctly. The first thing we need to do is at the top of your map, you need to write natural resources, transportation, and industry. Remember, if you get behind, you can always pause the video to get caught up. Natural resources, transportation, and industry. The first thing that happens is we find a lot of natural resources in the West. We have stuff like copper and lead, iron ore. You learned last year about the gold rush. They found gold in the West. They also found silver. But there's no factories to make those natural resources into anything in the West. All of those factories are in the East. And because we have railroads, we can bring these materials to factories in the East quickly and cheaply. So the first thing you need to do, or the next thing you need to do on your map, is write natural resources and then draw our arrow over to eastern factories. And it's easier if you do this at the bottom of the map. So natural resources and then a nice long arrow to eastern factories. Fabrics were produced in textile factories in New England. Textile is just a fancy word for fabric. So the jeans you're wearing, the t-shirts you're wearing, those are all textiles. New England is a region sort of in northeastern, northeast, so the very tippy top. Let's watch a quick extra video to tell us more about these factories. So what we need to do, we need to write down that textiles were produced in New England. Remember, they talked about the town of Lowell, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is definitely part of New England. Textiles were the first industry that was produced in our country. Before that, we mainly had an agricultural country. Cars are made in Detroit, Michigan. If we look in this picture on the right, these men are hand making. Look at his hand, putting those windows in by hand. These guys are sewing the seatbelts and the upholstery on the chairs. But all the automobile industry is still centered in Michigan, in Detroit. Detroit is right over here in Michigan, so make sure you put your dot. I put autos, short for automobiles, or you could put cars, are made in Detroit. Our next industry is the steel industry. Steel is a fantastic metal. It's really strong, it's really light, and we can use it for things like building skyscrapers. The problem is, for a long time, steel was really hard to make. If you were able to afford steel weapons, you must have been really rich because it was expensive back in the Middle Ages. But now, steel isn't expensive. And it's because we figured out ways to make it cheaper and more efficiently. Steel is made from iron. And iron ore just means the kind that we find in the ground. Iron ore was found throughout the Midwest. And they needed to bring it to factories in the east to make it into steel. And a big city that has a ton of steel factories, even now, is Pittsburgh. So on our map, put a little dot on Pittsburgh. Remember, Pittsburgh is in the western part of Pennsylvania. And write steel in Pittsburgh. Our last industry is meat packing, and I know that sounds kind of gross. Before the 1800s, meat did not last very long. If you didn't have a fridge, either you ate it while it was still fresh, you got a couple days then, or maybe you doused it in a ton of salt, in which case it was really gross, and you didn't really want to eat it very much anyway. During the Civil War, Americans figured out that if you put meat in cans, it lasts a lot longer. And Chicago was perfectly placed to ship those meat cans to all of the soldiers. And then after the war, I still produced a lot of canned meat and sent it all over the country. So if we put our dot on Chicago, we can say meat packing in Chicago. Remember, Chicago is in that northeast corner of Illinois. If you look at our industries, you can see they're all in the eastern part of the country. Those eastern factories. The last thing we need to talk about is transporting finished products. Before we had railroads going everywhere, if you wanted something, you either had to make it yourself or you had to find someone nearby who could make it. Once the railroads started moving around, people realized they could order things from factories all over the country and get them shipped right to them. And there were a lot of companies that started doing this themselves. For instance, Sears and Roebuck, you've still heard of Sears, is still a department store, would send out these giant catalogs with just about anything you could think of. Over here we have a washing machine. Here is baseball bats and baseball mitts. And these would just be sent straight to you on the railroad. It's an entirely new idea. So the last thing we need to put on our map is that the finished products that were made in these eastern factories were shipped to the rest of the country using the railroads. So write that in the middle of your map and then draw those nice neat arrows going everywhere so we remember that our natural resources came from the west, but they were sent to eastern factories. Textiles were made in New England, automobiles were made in Detroit, steel was made in Pittsburgh, and meat packing was done in Chicago. After these natural resources were turned into all those finished products, they were then sent back on the railroad for people to order from all around the rest of the country. Make sure you have completed your map and you have all of this copied down. I'll see you all tomorrow.